All right, hello, and welcome to the third City Council conversation, hosted by the Keizertimes. My name is Eric Howell. I'm the managing editor of the newspaper. And today I am speaking with the candidates for position 5 on the Keizer City Council. We have today with us Ross Day, and I'm sorry, position 2 on the City Council. Thank you both. Thank you for making faces. This is position 2 on the City Council. These are the two candidates running to replace outgoing Councilor Kim Freeman. Kim has just decided not to run again, so we're looking for somebody new to step into her shoes. So again, by way of introduction, I have with me Ross Day, who is running against Dylan Juran. And thank you both for being here, and we're going to get right to it. So my first question for you is, I just want to let people get to know you a little bit. Tell us who you are, what your day job is, a little bit about your passions, and kind of what's led you to try to move into service for the city. So we'll start with you, Ross.
My name's Ross Day. I'm an attorney here in Keizer. I've been practicing law for roughly 20 years now. My focus is primarily on land use and real estate. I've lived in Keizer for 22 years now, I think, 21 years. Married, 3 kids. All my kids have been raised here in Keizer. And I served on the Keizer Planning Commission as well as the State Capitol Planning Commission. I love the city. It's a great city. We're very blessed to live here. And I'm just at a point in my life now where I can give back. And I really want an opportunity to serve the people of Keizer and continue to make Keizer the wonderful place that it is.
All right, thank you very much. How about you, Dylan? Introduce yourself to the voters.
Hi, I'm Dylan Juran, and I've lived here for a long time. So since I was a kid, I went to all of the schools we have to offer, really. I mean, I guess not every element. I went to one of each section. So I started at Gebzer, then went to Whitaker Middle School, and then graduated from McNairy High School here in Keizer. And for my day job, I am a technical consultant for a nonprofit in Portland called NWEA. It used to stand for Northwest Evaluation Association, but the short of it is that we provide tests for schools all over the country and actually all over the world. And kids take those tests, and so we can inform their teachers and schools about what they know, so we know what to teach them next. So I am responsible for helping deal with a lot of technical conversations with districts all over the country. And then in my spare time, I do a lot of different things, one of which is Satellite Gaming. It's a nonprofit I helped found that addresses community needs for students focused on video games. And then for the last 5 years, I've also served on the Parks Advisory Board. I was part of the group that was responsible in part for the parks fee that's helped make a lot of the improvements people might be noticing over the last couple of years.
All right, thank you both. The next question is a little bit more touchy-feely, but it kind of speaks to the moment that we're in with a lot of different things. I'm just curious to have you talk a little bit about your lived experience here in Keizer. You know, what have you seen that you know, Ross, you mentioned you love it. You know, Dylan, you've grown up here. What have you seen that you appreciate about Keizer? Where do you think it can be improved? Those sorts of things. And just what has your day-to-day experience been living in the city with other residents?
Sure. So I've always described Keizer as Oregon's biggest neighborhood, because I always feel like, regardless of where I am in the city, when I meet with somebody or I just come across somebody at the store or wherever, we're not just Keizerites. I feel like we're all neighbors, and it's a unique feeling for a community like ours, because you know my job as a land use lawyer, I travel all over the state. I'm in city council, county commission hearings, all around the state, and I can tell you that the community feel, the sense of neighborly concern for each other, it's unique to this wonderful community. And I'm very, my wife and I oftentimes just reflect on how blessed we really are to live in such a wonderful community. Notwithstanding everything else that's going on in the world, we have a really tremendous community that really pulls together and really tries to help everybody at every step that they can. And you know, I think about the community dinners that are at St. Edward's that my mother helps quite a bit with, and we help out with as well. Those are just an example of really kind of the sense that I'm talking about.
All right. How about you, Dylan? Lived experience here in Keizer.
Yeah, having grown up here, I feel like I've experienced kind of a lot that the city has to offer. You know, our schools and our parks, and owning a home here. So all of the kind of different milestones you might experience there, I've had positive experiences with. So I feel like I've got pretty good relationships with some of the teachers that we have. So Laura Reed is a counselor who I know pretty well from having been a student of hers. And so just, I think I agree with Ross that like all of the people that, you know, I know from Keizer are really like more than just people I know. They are neighborly. And so, yeah, there's a lot of, I've participated with my church in a thing that we did. I mean, again, not this year, but
Pre-COVID.
we did for, yeah, you know, pre-pandemic world. We did a thing called Serve Fest for a long time, where we just took a day out of the year, I guess, you know, where instead of doing traditional style church, we went out and made a focus of serving and supporting members of the community. So I got to see a lot of different kinds of people doing that, and be right there with them, you know, handing out hot dogs and you know, helping them fix bikes or whatever it was. So that was a really cool experience. And when my wife and I got together and were married, and we were like, oh, time to buy a house, the only choice for us was Keizer. So that neighborly feeling is absolutely important to us.
All right. So we have to deal with some of the boring city stuff. But I tried to come up with interesting questions. So I've lived in Keizer for 17 years, and I always, for some, you know, just being around, you hear people talk about Keizer and like how it started and all these different things. And, you know, if you live in certain areas, Keizer is viewed as a tax dodge. The other times it's viewed as, you know, the liberation from Salem. And other times I've heard it referred to as about water resources, which makes us sound like Chinatown. And I think that's awesome. But the question here is, the city's been kind of stuck as a result of the way it was established with very, very tight purse strings. Now, the city has chosen to meet some of the demands that we've had on other services like police and parks by instituting fees. And I'm curious to know whether you guys, you know, have, you know, Dylan, obviously you worked on the fee at some level, but how do you feel about that as the continued way that Keizer operates? And have you heard of any alternatives or anything that you'd like to bring to the table as far as options, given how tight it is? So we're back to you, Ross, when you're ready.
Okay, so obviously, you know, however you want to, you know, some people who live outside of Keizer want to characterize Keizer as, I think it's really stems from jealousy more than anything else. Certainly not. Maybe because they wish that they had the type of leadership and foresight that I think, you know, the previous leaders of the city have demonstrated. One of the things that makes Keizer unique is that we don't overtax our folks. We don't impose regulations or burdens on the citizens or businesses, and that's what makes us unique from Salem. It's what distinguishes us from Salem. I remember when the city of Salem was considering a tax on restaurants, and the city of Keizer said, yeah, go, do it, because we're going to tell people to come to Keizer where you don't have to pay a tax on on your food bill. And that's what sets us different. So I don't know that we need to necessarily change it, because that's what makes Keizer Keizer. There are always going to be demands on the budget. That's the nature of government. Government can't be everything to everyone, but we have to prioritize what those spending needs are and make sure that we're getting the most bang for our buck, which I am confident that we are doing right now.
All right. How about you, Dylan? Are fees the only way forward, or do we have other options that you've thought about or heard about?
I think as you described it, we're in a pretty tight, like, we don't have a lot of options. So I agree with Ross. I think that, like, the mobility and the flexibility that Keizer has by being unique and separate from Salem is a strength. And there are things that we can do because we aren't Salem that fit our community better than if we had just been lumped in with the rest of Salem. And I think we need to continue to make those decisions for what works best for us and what we need. And we can continue to use that strength that we have of the additional flexibility. That resulted, of course, in the parks and police fee.
Yeah.
Partly by means of necessity, and partly because we had no other options. So we had to get some of these things done, and we didn't really have any other way to pay for them. I can't think of a lot of other ways that we can do that, but I also don't now see a lot of other things that we absolutely need to do that for. So if I feel like I could be convinced that something else like that needed to happen, but I can't see anything right now where it does. Like, I would say, if anything, the parks fee, as we start to get things under control, and right now our maintenance fees are really like replacement fees, and those are a lot larger of a bill than what we already have. And what we need. Once you get things to a sustainable level, the parks fee might even be able to be reduced rather than increased or added on. It's really just a matter of, like, what do we need, what's best for our community, and how can we make it happen? So if that ends up being another fee, then I'll support it if that's what we need. But hopefully we don't have to do that.
All right, thank you. Kind of on that same note, this goes back to the city founding, and I'm going to apologize if this question is a mouthful, but it's not my fault. So the city has an adopted mission statement, and that mission statement reads, keep city government costs and services to a minimum by providing city services to the community in a coordinated, efficient, and least cost fashion. So that motto was adopted many, many years ago, and I'm curious to know whether you as candidates might think it's time to reconsider, like, what is the city's mission statement? Could it be updated to include a different thing other than just low cost, which is, kind of where we're at and got us to the point where we are. So back to you, Ross.
Sure. So I don't know that the mission statement needs to be changed. And I think that it's an outstanding mission statement that reflects really kind of who Keizerites are. And, like I was saying earlier, we don't need to be everything to everyone. What we need to do is provide basic city services to our citizens, and do it in as a cost-effective, efficient, and effective manner as possible. And that's certainly what I support.
All right. How about you, Dylan?
Yeah, I will say the thing that sticks out about that mission statement to me is that it sounds, I don't know, uncomfortably focused on money. I guess is what how I would phrase it. Just it does sound like you said some people view Keizer as a tax dodge, and while it's true that Keizer certainly has some of the lowest taxes in the surrounding area, I don't know that I think that I identify Keizer as that's what we're about. Our what is it, slogan, I guess,
motto.
our motto of pride, spirit, and volunteerism. I think that's more the focus. And so I think that maybe if it were to be changed, if the conversation were to get pretty serious about that, I would maybe focus more on the pride, spirit, and volunteerism that we already rally around, because a lot of the things that we are able to do and have done have been for a lot cheaper, because our community comes in and works to actively promote that cause for a lower cost. And while the lower cost is a really great benefit, I don't know that like our mission was to provide the big toy for as cheap as possible. It was to provide the big toy as best we could because we thought we needed it, right? And so everybody came out and helped construct it, and we were proud of it. So I don't know, that was like a muddled response, but I feel like, I could maybe want to focus on a different thing in the mission statement.
All right. All right. So last question on budget, and I promise we'll move on to more engaging things in a little bit. One of the top agenda items for Mayor Kathy Clark in the past, I'm going to say 6-8 months, but even before that, she was kind of forecasting it, has been city staffing. The city staff of Keizer wear many, many, many hats. I don't think you would be able to write a job description for many of them any longer. It's just whatever is needed at the moment. But that's become a concern for Kathy as we move forward in making sure that we're planning for succession. And so, it may not be that maybe Keizer has grown beyond just a city attorney. Maybe we need a city attorney and an official paralegal sort of thing. What do you see as staffing? How do you see staffing as for the city as a whole? What have yours been your interactions with it? And have you paid attention to these conversations about staffing and have any thoughts about them and maybe what Keizer should do to move forward? Or back to you, Ross.
Sure. Well, obviously in our form of council, mayor council government, the staffing decisions ultimately are made by the city manager, but obviously with a lot of input from the city council and from the mayor. As a general rule, my experience with city staff has been nothing but outstanding. I think our city staff should be commended for the work that they do. I never cease to be amazed by what they're able to accomplish. If the city manager, as a city council, were to come to me and say, we need to increase our staffing levels here or there or wherever, that's absolutely something I would consider. And we'd have to figure out how we're going to afford it. But the number one goal for the city is, as I said earlier, you can't be everything to everyone, but what services the city does provide to its residents, those services need to be provided in an outstanding manner with fantastic customer service as effectively and as efficiently as possible. And if that's not happening, then we need to figure out how to make that happen. For instance, with building permits or land use permits, if somebody wants to build start a business or build a house or whatever else, and we don't have enough staff in the planning department to be able to process those permits, and those people aren't going to be able to, say, start a business here in town. And so that has a very real impact, not only on the community and the citizens, but also at the end of the day, the amount of revenue that the city is going to be deriving as well. So where there is a demonstrated need for efficiencies and maybe more staffing, absolutely, I think we need to be willing to consider, hiring more people.
All right. And you, Dylan, staffing in Keizer City Hall.
Yeah, I
agree
with everything Ross says. I feel like if I were to say an answer first, it would pretty much would have just been what Ross said. I think maybe I'll add on that, I think the concern I would have is that, like, I like to look at, with the staff at Satellite Gaming, this is one of my concerns too, is like, what's the liability if we lose a lot of this staff that we currently have that really does go above and beyond?
Mhm.
And the cost of like replacing them would maybe be more than what we're paying for now, just because they're doing so many things. So I think, like, absolutely, in order to reduce the liability long term, we probably want to look at it. Unfortunately, may need to increase the cost short term, but the reduction in liability would be worth it.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so the next big boring topic is growth in Keizer. There's been a lot of continuing conversations about growth, and obviously this has been going on for decades at some level. But how will Keizer grow? How should it grow? What should we allow? What should we shoot for? How do you feel city leaders have handled the issue of growth so far? And is there a particular direction that you hope we're heading as a candidate for the council?
Well, the city has handled it about as well as they can because our hands are largely tied, because unfortunately we share an urban growth boundary with the city of Salem. And so our ability to move the urban growth boundary is largely tied to the consent of the city of Salem. So to the extent we're able to grow, there's only so much we can do without going to the city of Salem. We're going to have to, the fact of the matter is the amount of buildable land in Keizer is virtually nil. And so we're going to have to expand the urban growth boundary. We don't have any industrial land. I'm a land use lawyer. I keep an eye on these things. I disagree with you. Land use to me is extremely exciting. But, and so we're going to have to grow, but we're going to have to grow responsibly. And we're going to have to grow, I think, in a phased in manner to make sure that we are able to handle it as a city. And when I say handle it as a city, there are a lot of things we have to take into consideration. Number one is there infrastructure in place? Infrastructure, roads, water, sewer, schools, those sorts of things. Do we have that in place? Another thing we have to be cognizant of is the fact that when you start increasing the availability, the inventory of homes in the area, that, it's basic supply and demand. When supply is high and demand is low, people's property values go down. That will have an impact on Keizerites as well. So when we talk about growth, we need to make sure that we do it responsibly, but we are going to have to expand our urban growth boundary. Where? I mean, that remains to be seen. But that's going to have to be something that's going to have to, the next city council, next couple of city councils are going to have to address that, and we're going to have to accomplish it. And whether we can do that working with the city of Salem, or if it's going to require help from the legislature. I've already talked to State Representative Bill Post about doing that. Remains to be seen, but certainly that is something that we're going to have to do in order. Otherwise, what happens is the cost of living in Keizer goes up, and we start excluding people from being able to move into our community, and that's not something I think anybody wants.
How about you, Dylan? How has city handled growth, and is there a direction you would like to see the city take as far as, UGB expansion or just more density?
Yeah, I as Ross mentioned, it's pretty much inevitable, and really looking at just the available geography in Keizer, there's not that many directions we can go with that. So there's, a pretty high probability we'll have to expand northward. But I think there are some things we can do in the meantime to try and, increase the availability of probably higher density housing. It's probably the highest demand right now in the short term, and maybe changing some of our zoning rules around that. There's been some talk about mixed use buildings as a means for that, but all of that would ultimately be a temporary solution that might help us for like a really long term just growth for like decades and decades down the road. So preparing us for that now wouldn't hurt. But I think the urban growth boundary presents opportunity not just in housing, but as Ross mentioned, we don't really have any industrial options, and so bringing the opportunity for industrial zoning and with that jobs is a great opportunity for Keizer as well.
All right. So next question on housing and that sort of thing. One way or another, it's looking like cities like Keizer are going to be compelled to increase density. A lot of people who live in the city, I'm speaking to you from a house that's right next door to a duplex that's on a corner. We have a lot of that in Keizer as a way to, have available housing of different types. The state legislature is working on plans to kind of redo all of the single-family residential zones in the state and offer more greater density housing in those places that, more duplexes, more triplexes, quadplexes, that sort of thing. And this kind of goes to something Rosh mentioned earlier, is that right now Keizer already has a deficit of sidewalks and streetlights, and the other things that are going to be needed are traffic mitigation efforts and just general city services like water capacity, sewage capacity, that sort of thing. Some of those we seem to be okay on, but given that we know that that's coming, what should be done now to pave the way to make sure those infrastructure things get put in place throughout the city?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm a firm believer that homeownership is I'm not a believer, I know this, is the start of the best path to financial independence for anybody. So I think that this myth about duplexes, triplexes, quadplex, whatever you want to call them, is absolutely silly, because the people who live in those are renters, right? I want people who can move to Keizer and can buy a home and establish roots and become a part of our neighborhood. That's not what you get when somebody is renting. So I'm not a real big fan of that, which is why expanding the urban growth boundary and allowing people to have different options, homes at different price points to allow people to start on their path is certainly what I support. With that development comes, systems development charges and those sorts of things that'll be used to build the necessary infrastructure. But this dovetails back to what I was saying earlier, and that is that whatever the development is that we're going to have to, eventually approve, we're going to need to make sure that our infrastructure is able to handle it. The problem with the legislature coming down and mandating, different types of zoning or reclassifying what constitutes, whether it be residential or high density residential or something of that nature, is when they impose those mandates on us, they're not also, providing us with the funds that we need in order to comply with those mandates. So, there's a question as to whether or not those mandates are even constitutional, because there is an unfunded mandate provision of the Oregon Constitution. So I think to the extent, and the other problem with that too, is what you really have, what you're talking about, Eric, is a legislature that is imposing how they want, Portland, Beaverton, Tigard, those types of communities to look on everybody else. And that one size does not fit all. So I think there are a myriad of options at our fingertips to address that issue, but I'm not sure at this point it's a direction that I think that the city council should be planning for. I think they should be planning for reasonable, responsible growth by expanding the urban growth boundary.
So I hate to use the word redirect with a lawyer, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to just to add on to one part of that, just so I can get the answer from you, Ross.
Sure.
Like I mentioned, there's a deficit already of sidewalks and streetlights, which, you know, if you go to West Keizer, it can be kind of a hairy mess depending on where you're walking and doing it. But there's even spaces in the other parts of the city.
Sure.
Is there anything that can be done to kind of address those issues right now?
Oh, absolutely there is. You can form limited improvement districts amongst in those areas. And you allow those neighborhoods to decide amongst themselves if this is something that they want to do. I think that gives them the ultimate voice in what their neighborhood is going to look like. You know, form a limited improvement district to put up streetlights or sidewalks or anything of that nature. And if the neighborhood turns out they don't want it, okay, good for them. That certainly is an option that's available to them.
All right. Okay, Dylan. So what can the city, or what can or should the city council do in the to prepare for the kind of growth that could be compelled, or just to address the needs that already exist?
Yeah, can I ask Ross a follow-up question on that?
Sure. Why not?
Okay. I mean, so I'm just curious about, these limited improvement districts. You're saying that if a community or like a neighborhood doesn't want that, what is the option though that if they can't do that, right? So like if West Keizer was the example given, if the community of West Keizer does want it but cannot afford the complications that come with a limited improvement district, what's your solution for that?
Well, I'm not sure what complications would come with it. They can choose. I'm working on the assumption that they're on the property tax that you're not at full compression, and so you'll be able to impose some sort of a tax on limited, because there is a district. There is amount that special districts can impose. So I'm not sure, and that would be administered by the city of Keizer and collected by Marion County. So I'm not sure what difficulties there would be in terms of imposing or collecting the tax. And then obviously there are statutes there are statutes that deal with how you would actually build the improvements. So I'm not sure that there would be any, it's pretty well set out. That they do. It's very frequent, very common up in Portland for people to form limited improvement districts, for instance, for street lighting. That's what I'm most familiar with. So the question is whether or not there's room in the property tax limits in Measure 5 and Measure 50 to impose those or to collect that revenue. But if there is, then it's a fairly simple process. Well, I don't want to say simple, but nothing in government's ever actually simple. But it's a straightforward process. How about that?
Right. Yeah. I guess I just and I don't know the answer to this, but if there's a neighborhood that like the improvements required exceed what possible revenue could be extracted through a limited improvement district, then they of course wouldn't be able to get these necessary, like I'm thinking for just like child safety, like getting to school. Oh, yeah. Sidewalks and streetlights, number one, of course, but then even there are places where maybe like electric or sewage or water or whatever needs to be improved or extended, and so you get a pretty long list, and that might exceed the possible revenue for that area. So like I said, I don't know if that is the case, but it would concern me. We would need to find solutions for these things, particularly the safe routes to school solution. We would need to find alternative means. I think it's pretty high priority.
Well, what a lot of folks do in those circumstances, what a lot of neighborhoods do in those circumstances, is they'll do it in phases. Because the biggest problem oftentimes for the single biggest cost, if you're, let's just stick with building a sidewalk. the single biggest cost is land acquisition, right? And what happens 99 times out of 100, for instance, if you're building a new subdivision, as a local government, you're going to require a dedication of right-of-way of, say, 50 feet, right? And you're going to use 6 of that feet for the sidewalk. Well, when you've got an existing neighborhood like West Keizer, you don't have that dedication. The right-of-way typically stops at the asphalt, right? So you're going to have to work on, that's going to be part of the discussion. You can lower the cost for a lot of these, for constructing these improvements if people voluntarily dedicate, their land. That's one option that is available that could actually, accomplish what you're suggesting, and at the same time, be something that's affordable.
So Dylan, I'm going to go back to you on this. I number one, I really appreciate both of yours engagement on this question. I think it's like one of those it's one of those things that the city council has a direct impact on and can have a direct impact on. So thank you for that. But Dylan, back to you. What should the city be doing at this point to, what growth is coming one way or another? It depends on if you're building one more sewer, you're building more sewer lines, or you're redeveloping what we have in current neighborhoods to accommodate more population, regardless of where they come from. What do you think the city should be doing now to prepare for that future day?
Yeah, I think, we've already kind of talked about a lot of things in that last little conversation. So I appreciate you accommodating me in the back and forth, Ross. But I think the number one thing we can do is to just make sure that we're setting good policy right now for going forward. And for that, I think we really absolutely got to make sure that we future-proof our policy for the needs that are coming down the line, right? So of course we've got to require, the right, sewer and water and electrical and right of way and all of that. But I would love to have some wiggle room in there for technology improvements as well and other types of utilities. So those can help the new build out. I think maybe we should also think about how we leave some cushion in there for improving the rest of the city that needs to be brought up to speed there. And then we've got the aforementioned different options for limited improvement districts and other things. We can start looking at those right now, so that we can bring our sections of the city that desperately need it up to at least what we need now. And then when we're doing that, we're setting good policy for we need this now, and we're probably going to need some more later. Let's do that now, not wait until we do need it later.
All right. Again, thank you both for the engagement on that question. I'm a planning nerd. I like the city planning meetings are literally like one of the highlights of the month for me. Because it's like where the rubber of democracy hits the road. But thank you again. So we're going to move into some other topics, and we'll move a little bit more fluidly through different things now, rather than sticking on single issues. But number one, what is a city councilor's role in fostering business community within Keizer? And what do you think has been done well in this regard, and what could be improved?
I think that the government's job is to provide services, figure out what services need to be provided, and then provide those in the most effective, cost-effective, efficient manner as possible. And the issue that I have in my practice that I run into, whether it's my land use practice or my business practice or whatever, is when the government is the one who's getting in the way somebody moving forward, investing capital, creating jobs, those sorts of things, because that doesn't help anybody. Nothing worse than the government doing it just because that's what the government does. And so, Ronald Reagan's old line, the worst thing you could possibly hear is, "Hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help." And so our job, I think, as a city council, frankly, as a government, is to make it as, we've got services, we need to make sure that the public is protected, but then let business conduct business. And that means, not imposing regulations, restrictions on businesses that are going to hamper their ability to go out and make, earn a profit and hire people and so on and so forth. So I think that's what our focus as city councilors needs to be. A great example is a sign code. When you change the sign code, you're imposing additional costs on these businesses. And the question is, what is the cost that we're imposing on these businesses worth the benefit that we're receiving as a community? And that'll be the measure that I use when considering any of these, anything that comes before me is the benefit that we're receiving as a community worth the cost that we're imposing on these businesses?
How about you, Dylan? Role of a city councilor in fostering community, and how do you think of what's been done so far, and what would you do differently, if anything?
Yeah, I think, as Ross said, a lot of the responsibility is actually just kind of stay out of the way in a lot of ways. So I think, promoting what the Chamber of Commerce, I said Chamber of Council, the Chamber of Commerce is doing, like, they're kind of taking a lot of the responsibility of fostering like a good business environment for the businesses in Keizer, right? So like continuing to allow them to do what they do best is great. I don't want to misrepresent what Ross was saying. I maybe disagree a little bit in that sometimes the role is to get in the way in good ways, right? You want to make sure that the regulations that you have in place are to prevent unfair practices or discriminatory practices, or just something that's not a good long-term investment for the city to allow for certain, like sign code, to continue on his example there. There are definitely means for abuse in a completely free reign sign code, right? That's why they exist. So while I think we want to try and stay out of the way as much as possible, obviously there are places where we have to look at things and go, yeah, there is means for abuse there, and we need to prevent that at least a little bit. So, our role is to see that when it happens and hopefully try and prevent it a little bit when, so there are places that we can look at other towns of our size and scope and say, well, why do they have this type of regulation that we don't yet have? Do we have a problem with that now? Do we anticipate having a problem with it? What can we put in place preemptively to make sure it never becomes a problem? So we want to stay out of the way as much as possible, let people do what they do best, but also keep the people in Keizer safe with some amount of regulation, I think.
All right. One of the great misconceptions is that city councilors have a say in what businesses come to town. The fact of the matter is that the city can it has a space, or a developer has a space, and it's the market that decides what businesses come here. There was a particular burger fast food chain that caused a lot of different reactions when it announced it was coming to Keizer. Do you think the city could be doing more to foster a greater variety of businesses than what we have here? Do you think they should?
I don't think that the city's role is to pick and choose winners in the marketplace. That's what we get to do as citizens. You vote with your pocketbook. If you don't want a business there. You don't go and you don't patronize their business. And if enough people feel the same way, business probably won't last very long. That's always been my what I've found, my feeling certainly. Are there certain types of businesses we'd like to see here versus others? Absolutely. We'd like to see businesses that bring good family wage jobs to the community, that support our community, that support the pride, spirit, and volunteerism that makes Keizer great. Absolutely. But do I think that the city should be picking and choosing winners and losers in terms of who should be here and who shouldn't? I don't think that's the government's role.
All right. How about you, Dylan?
Yeah, I think luckily the answer, like we don't actually get to have a say ultimately in picking winners or losers. So both of us get to take a back seat on that. Is like, we don't think they should, but also we kind of can't. So as you said, this particular burger chain that had differing opinions. There's only so much the city has a say in whether they do or don't show up. There is a certain, I feel like I'm like taking the alternate answer only because to give like flesh out the ideas more.
You're okay.
Some argument in Keizer's own history around like doing some amount of prevention of certain businesses. For example, there's a large big box that looked at coming into Keizer and that has pretty bad reputation for its impact economically on towns. Like legally, there's limited amount of avenues to prevent that. And I think in Keizer's own history, it did end up going to like through a certain manner. I was a little young, but I think it did end up sort of going to a vote. Although I'll admit I was young at this time, so I don't really have real good, solid remembrance.
Hey, Dylan.
Yeah.
You're breaking up really bad at this point. Can you reset your audio for me just to see if that...
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I've had a couple of hiccups with this, but yours is just that this past answer has been really rough. Sorry.
All right. No, that's all right. I can, is this better?
We're still getting a little crackle, but it's better than, yeah, we were losing most of what you were saying there for about 3 seconds. So, but you were talking about the big box retailer trying to come in, and then there were decisions that ended up, changes made to the planning that prevented it. So.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I was pretty young when that happened, so I don't remember all of the details, but yeah, there was in Keizer's own history some changes that were made to prevent the installation of a big box store that might have had negative economic impacts on the city. And so there are some things that can be done to foster businesses that we think will be better for the town, and some that will be, preventing some that will be negative. But there's little that we should be doing there, and only when it is of a huge concern that we should be really taking any major steps to sway one way or the other whether a business comes to town. Like Ross said, ultimately, the biggest thing is that we want people to be able to build a business that they think is have a market viability here, and for citizens to be able to patronize those businesses to, I guess, root out whether it was market viable or not.
All right. Okay.
Is that good? Did I come through on the end there all right?
We still have a little bit of a crackle on the line, but I'm not sure we're going to get rid of it. Let me try this before we continue.
Well, I just switched my microphone. Is it better now?
That's better.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll leave it there.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. I think we just got some sort of backlog on the bandwidth, and it was just really interfering at this point. Okay, so last week the city kind of began its most full-throated conversation yet to date about some of the issues that are, kind of spreading throughout the nation regarding diversity, equity, and inclusivity. One of the things that some residents have called for is an inclusivity resolution. But the city council has telegraphed that they want this to be a broader conversation about systemic issues and how do they root those out at the city level. Where do you stand on the idea of an inclusivity resolution? And are there things that you think can or should be addressed as, that Keizer could address as part of this larger national conversation that's in the works?
Well, I think, we passed inclusivity resolution. That's great, but I don't think it's going to change if there's anything that's going on that's, leaving people to believe that Keizer is less inclusive than other communities. Passing a resolution, people aren't going to move here because they're going to say, oh, look, Keizer's got an inclusivity resolution. I think that's silly if that's what people think. What we need to do as a community and as a city council is where there are instances where people are being made to feel as if they're not included, we need to address those. The problem that I have with this inclusivity resolution is how tone deaf some of the people are that are supporting it. My oldest son is disabled. He's moderately involved with cerebral palsy. I've been involved in the disability community for years. The least included community in our society are people like my son. Okay, we have meandering sidewalks, which was all the rage, and a lot of people like those, right? But when you're a 20-year-old who uses what's called a reverse gait walker or a power wheelchair, that meandering sidewalk is anything but inclusive. That you might as well just tell them, don't walk here. But the people who are supporting this inclusivity resolution don't talk about people with special needs. They're not worried about that. So I have a particular problem with this specific one. But more to your question is rather simple, and that is, where we have instances like that, where we put in meandering sidewalks and we're telling people like my son who have impaired mobility, we don't want you here, because that's the message that you're sending. And I think that we as a city council have an obligation to stop that. But, because whether there's an inclusivity resolution or not doesn't straighten out the sidewalks down River Road.
So I appreciate your perspective. Thank you for telling us. Dylan, same question to you. Where do you stand on inclusivity resolution? And is there anything that you'd like to see come of these conversations that are being had in City Hall now, specifically?
Yeah, I am supportive of a inclusivity resolution. I think it's not enough, though, right? I think that's basically what Ross was saying, is that we need that. I think we need to start with, we are committing to be inclusive of all people. That means race, gender, let's say like neuronormative or or non-neuronormative or whatever, all the different kinds of people. The list is pretty long of different marginalized groups of people. We need of all of those, and we need to commit to be inclusive to all of those. But it's not enough to just say that we are inclusive, right? That just gives you, maybe, I guess, a good feeling that you've said you're a good person. But it's one thing to say that you're going to do good things, and it's a whole other thing to do those good things. This is a starting point that we can't stop at. We have to, take better action for being inclusive to disabled people of all sorts. We need to be inclusive and make sure we're refining and charting new policy that's inclusive of all kinds of people. So I agree with Ross. We can't just sit back on that. I think we need to do more than that. But I think it starts with at least making a commitment.
All right. Okay. So there's a group of folks in Keizer who are putting together a renewed effort to get a Keizer public library. At what point does this become a city council, part of the city council discussion, and what do you think of the idea? Would you support it?
Oh boy. So I'm just gonna plead ignorance on this one. I have not educated myself enough on the issue of libraries in Keizer and a library district. As a general rule, I like libraries; they're just fine. But I don't know enough about this issue to be able to speak really intelligently on it. But I can tell you I am 100% open. I have friends of mine who are on both sides, and I don't know the answer. And so this is one of those ones where I'd be willing to sit down and listen and consider. One thing I want to say, if you don't mind, just clarify something. I mentioned about the inclusivity resolution. It does mention people with disabilities, but the focus of the sponsors hasn't been on people with disabilities. It's been on people in other classifications. And like I said, I mean, an inclusivity resolution doesn't straighten out the sidewalks on River Road. But as far as the library goes, I'm not, I haven't educated myself enough about that specific issue.
That's okay. You don't have to have all the answers today. I'm trying to give there's a broad spectrum of constituents in Keizer.
It's tough when you're a lawyer. You get paid to know everything, right? When you don't, it's hard for a lawyer to say, "Hey, wait, I don't have any idea."
It's okay. How about you?
I thought the trick was that you're getting paid to know where to find the answers.
There you go. That's it right there.
Which I guess is sort of what librarians do, isn't it? Just to get clever on it. Thank you. I would to see Keizer. I don't know that I'm willing to say I would do whatever it takes to get a library in Keizer, but I would one.
Hey Dylan, hang on one second.
Growing up, I sure.
Dylan, sorry, we're now your video is behind your audio. So if you don't mind starting again, I think you were saying you love a library in Keizer. Is that
yes?
what you were?
Am
Okay.
I good now?
I think we're better now. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Okay. No, I think it actually might be my fault. If we want to interrupt it, I can switch to a different device, but it's up to you.
I think it's not terrible, so just keep going.
Okay. I would love to see a library in Keizer. I don't know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes, but I would love to see one. I think I certainly noticed growing up the absence of a library. School libraries are nice, I guess, that we have them, but they're not enough even for the students who go to our schools, and they're certainly not enough for the rest of the community at large. And libraries, I know, especially people who live in Keizer whose access to libraries is limited, may not know that libraries offer so much more services now than just books on shelves that you can check out. Libraries offer access to technology that is out of reach for most, or for not most people, but for many people.
Oh, Dylan, you
internet.
Are you there?
Yep.
Do you want to switch devices?
I'll switch to probably 30 seconds.
Okay, go for it. You were talking about your experience with it in schools, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I think what I was mentioning last, hopefully this is the last thing you caught me with, was that libraries offer access to so much more than just books on shelves that you can check out, right? They offer access to technology that a lot of people don't have access to or familiarity with, and classes and other like resources for meeting and using things that maybe even not even that you can't get access to, but that you don't need constant access to, that a community service like that can offer you. I'm thinking specifically of, outside things like the internet that everyone knows, the libraries have been good at that since the 90s, but like access to 3D printers is something that, maybe you don't want to spend $3,000 on a 3D printer, but access to one in your community could be really useful for prototyping an idea that you have for the Boy Scouts or something, or Eagle Scouts here in town is real popular in doing stuff. So they can be like, oh, let's build a prototype fixture that we can build with a 3D printer, try it out for building this new type of bird's nest or, bench modification, all sorts of stuff that
Better mousetrap.
Yeah, better mousetrap.
Well, if I might,
Yeah.
just to piggyback on what Dylan is saying, my oldest son, when he goes to his community transition program, the Salem Public Library has a whole host of programs for special needs community, and everything from learning how to plant a plant to cooking to everything else. So yeah, Dylan's 100% right about that. I mean, a library is much more than a repository for books. It offers a lot to a community.
Yeah, and there would be a cost to us for that as a community, but so I'm sort of, I guess, trying to sell people on the idea by mentioning all these things. Like, I would love to have access to that here in Keizer. Obviously, there is Salem that we can go to, but not only is it just natural for most people in Keizer to prefer to not have to go to Salem, but I think, as I was mentioning earlier, the flexibility and mobility that we have as a local community, even if it is just 10 minutes away, we can really tailor our library and our services to our community's needs more, more highly specific. And I think that would be just really valuable to our community.
All right. Yeah, the one thing I've never kind of gotten over here in Keizer is that crossing the Salem Keizer Parkway is like, the Continental Divide.
Yeah.
Anyway, so in non-pandemic times, I don't even, how do you even say it anymore, right? The city council would actually be engaged in a very large conversation revolving around the Keizer Little League Park right now. There is, there's been a lot of, I don't want to call it animosity, but just unrest with the way that the Little League Park is managed, it's scheduled. We contract right now with a specific Little League organization. Sometimes it's been with another organization, but it always creates friction. The city has had formed a task force to try to figure out a way forward, which has seemed to have resulted in a third faction, which I think was not the goal. But the core question is still, what do we do about this Little League Park? Who's going to manage it? Who's going to schedule it? Who's going to run it? COVID has given us a bit of a break in this, but where do you stand on this issue? Should Keizer look at creating a recreation district to come alongside the Parks District to start offering services, not only as far as the management of that park goes, but things in other parks, activities and things for kids and adults alike. How do you feel about that? Have you followed the discussions at all? And where do you sit? What do you think the city should do? Should we just look to contract it out? Or, is it time for the city, as a lot of people who are involved with those organizations say, to step up?
I'm going to let Dylan start with this one.
Go for it, Dylan.
Yeah. So my experience with this has been mostly related to the Parks Board, right?
Yeah.
And I have been not too pleased with some of the way things have gone. frankly, I don't know that right now Keizer is quite ready for like a recreation district.
Yeah.
As much as I would love that, I don't know that it's actually like time yet for Keizer. In my dealings with satellite gaming, we're working with usually much bigger cities that are doing really cool new things, that you don't traditionally relate to parks and recreation districts. So, there are cities elsewhere in the country that are looking to offer video games as a recreation service that their parks deal with, right?
Wow.
Yeah, and so we've had discussions with that, and so just like libraries offer more than books now, parks and the departments around them deal with much more than fields and swings. And the Little League field could and should probably be one of those things. I don't know that I have the right answer on how we fix it right now, but we can't continue to do what we've been doing, which has clearly not been successful.
All right. And you, Ross.
Sure. So a lot of the issues that face Keizer right now, I mean, let's keep in mind, Keizer's 38 years old.
Right.
And a lot of the issues that we're dealing with now are issues that that communities across Oregon dealt with in their infancy. I mean, I think we're the third youngest city in the state, and so I think one of the things that would be helpful to address this issue is to look at how other communities dealt with this. I'll just be frank. My kids didn't play baseball. My oldest boy played in the Challenger division, and we were able to play at the park. My middle son, he played soccer. He didn't play baseball, but yet we used the soccer fields over at Whitaker. And so I'm aware that there's a need for these fields, certainly. But the question is, what do you do with it, right? How do you address that need or a want? Maybe that's a better way of putting it, a want. And I think what we need to do is look at what other communities have done in similar circumstances, learn from their mistakes, benefit from their wisdom, and move forward. At the end of the day, though, I mean, I think I agree with what Dylan said. We're definitely going to have to do something because it can't continue on the way it is.
All right. Okay. I promise we're getting up near the end. So for the meantime, for the time being, it looks like COVID's going to be with us for a while longer. And there are many things that the city officials have no control over. They have to abide by what the governor institutes and what the public health authorities say they should be doing. However, there is a space for local leadership as we make our way through the pandemic. How would you like to help lead the community through this time? And Dylan, we're going to go back to you first, since
Sure.
Yeah. Give Ross a little bit of a break.
Yeah, I just didn't want to step on his toes. So, we have done some work already on, taking advantage of the CARES Act to provide some relief to businesses. It's probably not where we should stop, though. It's maybe a bold thing to say. Definitely not. I think we can and should be working on focusing on some other areas that we can offer some alleviation, taking advantage of any other resources, because it's not just about what we have, what we ourselves in Keizer can do. We can, of course, look to county and state and federal supports for things like we did for the CARES Act. And we need to also be focusing on individuals who have been impacted as well. There's not just businesses that have had to close down, but people who've lost their jobs, who have no means to find a new one right now, or homeless people who now can't be, taking advantage of the same things they might have in a pre-pandemic world. And so the support that they already didn't have is now even harder to get. So I would love to see what we can do in that direction as well. Caring for our businesses is important, and I think we can expand and do more than that as well.
Okay. How about you, Ross?
Well, I think the number one thing that the government can do, that the city can do, is show some compassion for those folks who are actually trying to make a way through this pandemic. I mean, I don't know how many times we've heard people talk about, well, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, so on and so forth. Well, there's no roadmap for whether it be President Trump, Governor Brown, the county commissioners, Mayor Clark. There's no roadmap for us on how to deal with this, right? And everyone is trying to do their best. And just because I go out and I, go shopping and don't wear a mask, it's not because I don't care. It's because maybe I might have. Now, I'm not saying I do. I wear a mask, but just because somebody doesn't wear a mask doesn't mean they don't care. Or just because a business opens doesn't mean they don't care. And unfortunately, in my practice, I've represented some folks who've tried to buck the system, who've tried to open up because they want to be able to provide for their family. They want folks that worked in their building to be able to provide for their family. And the response that they've gotten from the government has been anything but compassion. It's been a heavy-handed, really mallet to their head. And while I understand the concern about COVID-19 and all those sorts of things, there's another concern. Because when people sit around at home and they don't have a job, they're not earning income, they start to develop anxiety and depression and other types of mental illness that has an equally destructive effect on our society. And I think that's one of the things we've missed through all of this. But I think our job as a city, in terms of the leaders, is to just demonstrate compassion for everybody, that we understand that what they're going through hopefully will be the only time we'll go through this, and we'll come out of 2020 a lot better than we went in, right?
I'm knocking on my desk.
Yes.
Very vigorous.
Yes.
Okay. So on the same note, the many local authorities for the past 20 years have been focused on a Cascadia earthquake, emergency of some sort. In the last 8 months, we've had pandemics, and more recently, we've been, smothered in smoke from canyon wildfire.
Now we've got murder hornets.
And Ross, why are you trying to summon the hornets? But the question here is, the Keizer has spent a lot of time talking about earthquakes, but we haven't mentioned some of these other things that have happened. Should the city be doing more, either in preparation for a variety of emergencies, and or communicating to residents the necessity to be prepared for them when they arrive?
Yeah, I can go first again. Are we just switched for the rest?
We're just going to finish
great.
out with you,
Perfect.
Dylan, because we only have one other question after this.
Totally. It's tough because in a situation like this, a lot of the supports come from a stream down to Keizer more than Keizer itself as a government can. So, I personally wasn't super impacted by Marion County's, I would say, less than agile communication. But there probably were others. I mean, almost certainly, right? I think that we as a city can probably at least relook at our communication plans for city and state and even federal responses for emergencies. There are policies and codes that we have. Speaking to earthquakes specifically, building code. We have not a ton of impact here at a city level, but anything that we can look at for earthquake readiness and fire readiness and stuff in our policies. I think probably now is a good time to be just reevaluating all of those and making sure that we do have a plan for floods that we've had in our city before, earthquakes that are inevitable, fires that are now a much more prescient reality to some of us than we thought was possible. So yeah, I think we should be at least reevaluating our preparedness right now. I wouldn't go so far as to say like we haven't done enough, but I think you can always do more.
All right. How about you, Ross? Emergency preparedness.
So the town I grew up in, I actually lived in a town that was, I don't want to say destroyed, but it was substantially damaged by an earthquake. Growing up, I grew up in the South Bay Area, a little town called Morgan Hill. And when I was 12 or 13, we had a fairly large earthquake. And I can remember we went down to the local Safeway, and my dad put food back up on the shelves, and I went in the back, and I was putting, back when they had those little plastic rings that you put your soda cans in, I put soda cans back in the plastic rings. And then the next day, we all went out, a lot of people went out, and we walked down the main street, which was Monterey Road, and swept up glass and stuff from the businesses. And that was all facilitated, my recollection, of course I was 12 or 13, so it may not be entirely accurate, but by the city. And I think that's kind of dovetailing on what Dylan mentioned, is the communication aspect, and making sure that we have an effective communication strategy to get the word out in the case of, God forbid, a disaster. But what I can tell you is that, the city's role, because we as a general rule, the city has, the most direct contact, is to facilitate the aid coming from state and federal authorities to anybody who, God forbid, is affected by a natural disaster, by a disaster of any kind. And that comes down first and foremost to communication.
All right. You've made it to the final question. Congratulations. But there is a curveball with this one, so I don't apologize for it, though. All right. This is it. Without using the words pride, spirit, or volunteerism, what do you see as the strength of Keizer, and how would you build on it as a city councilor? I will mute you if you use one of those three words.
Wow, that's quite the task you've just given us. Well, I think we already both, I think in one of the first questions, really kind of spoke to the very localized community feel that Keizer has, a neighborly feel. I think we both use the word neighbor. That Keizer has. And I think Keizer's done a really good job of fostering that sense of community that's really neighbor-like. The Iris Festival that we all had to miss out on this year is one of those things I look forward to every year, because it just like exemplifies those three forbidden words and our neighborly feel. So I think we're really good at that, and maybe there's a room for improvement somewhere. So I will certainly be an advocate for any ways that we can improve on that. I can't think of any right now, because I think we're doing a real bang up job.
All right. How about you, Ross? No pride, no spirit, no volunteerism. Other than that, you got it.
Well, like I said at the outset, I mean, the word that I use to describe Keizer is neighborhood. Because that's what it is. I feel like we're all neighbors, and that's a unique feeling. That isn't. It's very uncommon. As the word unique would suggest, very uncommon. It's not something you get in other communities around the state, whether it be a small community, a large community. And I've had a chance to really see firsthand how that works, and I'm very grateful for that. And that's what, as a city councilor, I will continue to foster, promote, in addition to the 3 forbidden words, the 3 words of which I shall not speak, I will, that is the sense that I will make sure that I promote as a city councilor, because city council or neighbors are inclusive, neighbors are helpful, neighbors are willing to help when you need it or you want it, right? Neighbors are willing to be supportive. That's why I intend to promote as a city councilor.
All right. So we did it, guys. Thank you very, very much for being here today. I really, really do appreciate it. For the viewers, you've been hearing from the candidates for position 2 on the city council. Got it right this time. Ross Day and Dylan Juran. Thanks again, guys, for being here. And for the voters out there, please go out and vote. When you are thinking about casting a vote for the large national elections, believe me, city council elections matter just as much. So make sure you fill out all the damn ballot races too. Thanks,
also,
guys.
don't forget there's a drop box at Keizer City Hall if you
That's true.
can't mail it.
That's right. All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.